Although death is the obvious end, it's not what gnaws at us day to day. Still, there's something more corrosive, more subtle, time itself. Not just its passage, but the way it seduces us into thinking we have more of it than we do. Camus didn't wage war against death, he waged war against the lie of later, against the fantasy that we can postpone living until we found meaning, comfort, or certainty. What matters isn't how long we can stretch our lives, but whether we ever step into them fully while they're still happening. If we keep treating time like a bank account that refills every morning, then we never face the truth, that each second spent avoiding reality is a second we don't get back. It is not enough to name the absurd, we must also live in it, feel it. Rebel against its indifference not by retreating, but by insisting on presence. Camus didn't hand us a doctrine, he handed us a dare. Stop waiting. Despite our obsession with purpose, with legacy, with permanence, we remain creatures terrified of the now. We scroll, we stall, we sacrifice today for the ghost of a better tomorrow. And yet, the only rebellion that matters, the only freedom worth anything, starts by showing up to our own lives before they're over. By turning toward time, not away from it, we strip it of its power to manipulate us. By rejecting the comfort of delay, we reclaim the only thing we ever had, this exact moment. We must move from delay to defiance, from performance to presence. In a world where distraction is currency and detachment is rewarded, we must refuse to abandon the time we still have, not because it's sacred, because it's slipping, because it's real, because it's ours.
Although the world teaches us to measure time with clocks, Camus knew better. Time isn't something you count, it's something that dissolves, quietly, without spectacle, without even the decency to let you feel it slipping away until it's already gone. You wake up at 30 and realize you've been rehearsing a life instead of living one. You blink at 40 and wonder who wrote the script. The tragedy isn't that life is short, it's that we spend most of it acting like we're still in the warm-up. What matters isn't the number of days or even what you accomplish inside them. What matters is whether you're present for your own time, or just renting space in it while planning to live later. Camus wasn't interested in people who made peace with the slow death of routine. He was interested in those who saw through it, people who could feel the erosion behind the seconds, who recognize that the absurd isn't some rare existential crisis, it's the quiet panic hiding under your calendar. If you tell yourself you're preparing, waiting to feel ready, to feel sure, you have already surrendered something. Not to a god or a fate, but to the structure of time itself. Camus saw that most people don't fear death, not really. They fear having to make a choice while they're still alive, because once you choose, you're exposed. Once you live deliberately, there's no one else to blame if the moment fails to deliver. It is not enough to be aware that life ends. We must also understand that it leaks, slowly, through the rituals we perform without thinking, through the hours we exchange for comfort, through the days we waste imagining a future version of ourselves who will finally have the courage to do what the present one keeps avoiding. Camus didn't romanticize this. He didn't offer escape, he just told the truth. You are being drained, and no one is coming to stop it. Despite our obsession with goals and milestones, we rarely ask who we're trying to become. We keep moving through time as if it owes us a crescendo, as if meaning will appear at the end like credits after a film. But there is no end scene, no applause, no final lesson wrapped in a moral. There is only the weight of each moment you failed to show up for, and the brief, terrifying clarity that maybe you were supposed to carry that meaning in yourself the entire time. By refusing to delay his living, Camus rejected time's manipulation. He saw the trap, The idea that you need to know why you're here before you begin being here. That kind of thinking turns time into an enemy, and not a loud, brutal one, but the kind that kills you softly, the kind that smiles as you scroll through your phone, as you say, maybe next year, as you trade presence for the illusion of safety. We must move from surviving our days to confronting them, from organizing our time to occupying it. In a world where passivity is disguised as maturity and waiting is mistaken for wisdom, we must teach ourselves to stand in our minutes like they matter, because they do, even when they hurt. Especially when they hurt. Camus wasn't preaching urgency for its own sake. He was naming the violence of postponement, the self-betrayal of always needing more time before you allow yourself to live. So you have to ask yourself, where is your life right now? Not your plans, not your ambitions, your life. Is it in this moment, or is it in a version of you that never quite arrives? Because time is not ticking, it's bleeding. Although we speak of the future like it's inevitable, Camus understood it as a myth, one we use to avoid the unbearable weight of now. Still, we keep investing in later, as if it were a guarantee, as if time were a contract that life had already signed. But there are no guarantees, only habits. And the most dangerous one Camus knew was waiting. What matters is not how much time remains, but how much of yourself you've already exiled into the illusion of someday. Every decision you delay becomes a kind of spiritual debt, one that accrues interest in the form of regret. If you say, I'll write when I'm ready, or I'll leave when it's the right time, or I'll live when it makes sense, then you're already writing yourself out of the story. Camus saw this clearly. Most people die long before their bodies do. Not from tragedy, but from postponement. If the absurd is the silence of the universe, then the greatest absurdity of all is our insistence that life should make sense before we engage with it. Camus rejected this demand. He refused to live conditionally. He saw that the people most obsessed with the future often do the least with the present, and the ones who speak of purpose the most are often the furthest from their own pulse. It is not enough to name time as finite. We must also strip it of its illusion of mercy. Time will not wait until you're no longer anxious. It won't stall for your trauma to heal. It won't pause while you figure out your identity. Time doesn't negotiate. It moves. And if you don't move with it, then you become the ghost haunting your own life. Despite our obsession with readiness, we rarely ask who gets to define what ready means. Most people inherit someone else's timeline, parents, partners, institutions, all whispering that you need to wait just a little longer, until you're stable, until you're wiser, until it hurts less. But stability is a mirage. Wisdom never finishes forming, and pain doesn't follow your schedule. Camus wasn't patient with lies. He wanted fire, not forecasts. By refusing to delay his existence for the sake of clarity, Camus rewired the game. He didn't live for the future. He lived despite it. By choosing presence over preparation, he exposed the quiet cowardice of waiting. Not because patience is weak, but because it so often hides fear. Fear of failure, fear of visibility, fear of the risk that comes with meaning your life in real time. We must move from hoarding intention to practicing immediacy, from building imaginary futures to honoring the fragile miracle of now. In a world where productivity masquerades as virtue and deferral is framed as discipline, we must dare to live badly, but fully, in the face of absurdity. If you're waiting for the moment to feel perfect, it won't. If you're waiting for the pain to disappear, it won't. If you're waiting for permission to begin, it's already too late. The tragedy isn't that people fail. The tragedy is that they never even step into the arena. And so Camus asks, not with cruelty, but with clarity, what are you postponing that only your death will interrupt? What would happen if later never came? Although most people have never read The Myth of Sisyphus, they're already living it. Still, they don't recognize the boulder. They don't feel the slope. They think their suffering is unique, or that their frustration will be cured by a new job, a better partner, a cleaner morning routine. But Camus saw what they couldn't. The loop isn't the problem. It's the illusion that one day the loop will reward you. What matters isn't whether the boulder reaches the top. It never does. What matters is whether you've learned to see the absurd within the climb, and whether you can still choose to push. Sisyphus, doomed by the gods to roll a rock uphill for eternity, isn't a victim in Camus' eyes. He's a mirror. Because if you strip away the divine punishment and the mythological drama, what's left is your life. Wake, work, try, fail, repeat. You think there's an escape. Camus said there isn't, and then dared you to live anyway. If existence has no inherent meaning, then the question isn't what's the point? The question is, will you live without one? Camus refused to lie to himself. The myth of Sisyphus isn't a celebration of despair, it's a confrontation with it. He begins with the most brutal line possible. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Because if life is absurd, the only honest response is to ask whether it's worth continuing. But Camus doesn't argue for surrender. He argues for revolt, for dragging your awareness into the present moment and refusing to be broken by it. It is not enough to push the boulder. We must also see it, feel its weight, know its futility, and still push. Not to win, but to rebel. That's the absurd hero. Not the one who escapes, but the one who continues in full knowledge of what the continuation costs. In The Stranger, Musso is sentenced to death not for murder, but for indifference. For refusing to lie, to cry, to pretend life holds meaning when it doesn't. And in the end, facing execution, he feels the warmth of the sun and welcomes the absurd with open eyes. Despite every philosophy that tells us we must assign purpose to suffering, Camus leaves it empty. Not hopeless, just honest. The universe won't explain itself. God won't answer. Life won't slow down to tell you why it hurts. And if you wait for meaning to arrive before you act, you've already lost. By naming the absurd and refusing to bow to it, Camus transforms futility into freedom. The myth of Sisyphus becomes a map, not to happiness, but to lucidity, not to salvation, but to rebellion. By embracing the futility of the climb, we make space for something strange and vital, the ability to choose joy within the void. We must move from asking why to demanding how, from craving explanations to crafting a response. In a world where life is a silent machine and every day resets the suffering, we must become the ones who push, not because the boulder will ever reach the top, but because it's ours to push. Sisyphus was cursed. You are not. You're just awake. Although the plague was set in a quarantined city overrun by death, Camus wasn't writing about disease. Still, people read it like a historical metaphor. They miss the deeper infection, the one we all carry, the one we pretend isn't there until it's too loud to ignore. Camus wasn't interested in the virus. He was interested in how we lie to ourselves to survive it. What matters isn't the bacteria under the microscope, it's the moral silence that grows around it. Oran, the town in the plague, doesn't fall apart because of panic. It falls apart because of delay, denial, the refusal to believe that something unexplainable could undo all their rituals. It's just a phase, they say. It'll pass. That's what kills them. The waiting. The unwillingness to confront the truth before it becomes unbearable. If absurdity is the void, then the plague shows how quickly society will build a scaffold of delusion to avoid staring into it. The doctor, Ryu, doesn't fight for meaning. He fights to remain human, in a place that has forgotten what that means. He doesn't appeal to God. He doesn't quote scripture. He just keeps treating the dying. Because if there is no cosmic justice, no divine reward, then the only revolt that matters is one built in action. It is not enough to survive suffering. We must also decide what kind of person we become in the middle of it. The citizens of Oran are a warning, not a cast of characters. Camus makes them symbols of how quickly we normalize the unthinkable. We adapt to horror. We turn it into routine. And then we wonder why we feel hollow in the aftermath. Despite the horror, Ryu chooses to bear witness. That's his resistance. Not the cure, he knows there might not be one. Not the hope, he doesn't traffic in illusions. But presence, responsibility, care without consolation. In Camus' universe, that's the most sacred thing you can offer. Not answers, just presence. By refusing to turn his face away from death, Ryu embodies Camus' idea of the absurd hero, not someone who conquers the plague, but someone who refuses to look away while it's happening. By choosing attention over avoidance, he restores something lost in the chaos: dignity. We must move from blind endurance to lucid responsibility. From asking, when will this end, to asking, who will I be while it continues? In a world where the new plague isn't just a virus, but a moral numbness, we must choose to feel, choose to stay, choose to act, even when it doesn't fix anything. Although The Fall is written as a monologue, Camus isn't just telling a story. He's staging a trap. Still, most readers don't notice they're the ones being lured into it. Jean-Baptiste Clements speaks softly, politely. He tells his story like a friend offering wisdom in a bar. But with every page, every admission, you begin to feel something else. He's not just talking to you. He's indicting you. What matters in The Fall isn't Clements's guilt. It's what he does with it. He doesn't confess to be forgiven. He confesses to control the narrative. That's the brilliance of Camus' construction. Clements strips himself bare not to be redeemed, but to expose the hypocrisy of redemption itself. There is no priest, no God, no moral order in this world to absolve him. So he seizes power the only way he can, by accusing everyone else of being just like him. If the Myth of Sisyphus is Camus' manual for how to live without meaning, The Fall is his warning for what happens when you run from that confrontation. Clements once lived as a respected lawyer, admired and clean. But it only took a single moment, a woman leaping to her death in the Seine and his refusal to act, for the mirror to crack. He didn't help. He didn't jump in. He didn't even call for someone else. He walked away. And what collapsed wasn't just his image, but the entire scaffolding of a life built on self-deception. It is not enough to appear good.
we must also face the quiet moments when we choose silence over courage. Camus isn't moralizing here. He's dissecting. In a world without divine justice, the only courtroom is internal. Clements realizes this too late, and rather than repair himself, he becomes what he calls a judge penitent, someone who confesses in public not to purify himself, but to implicate everyone else. If I'm guilty, so are you. If I'm a coward, you're a liar. This is his revolt, not against the absurd, but against the unbearable burden of individual responsibility. Despite his articulate brilliance, Clements is not free. He is trapped in a prison made of mirrors, and the more he understands himself, the more he uses that understanding as a weapon. Camus shows here the darker side of self-awareness, how intelligence, when weaponized against one's own guilt, becomes a form of domination. Confession turns into manipulation. Insight becomes poison. By setting the fall in Amsterdam, a city of canals, fog, and echoes, Camus crafts the perfect setting for a man who cannot escape himself. By removing every structure of moral certainty, he exposes what's left. A man talking endlessly, trying to outrun his own echo. We must move from cleverness to clarity, from confession as theater to responsibility as practice.
Camus didn't wait for clarity, permission, or the right moment. He understood that time doesn't explain itself. It moves, and the cost of waiting is rarely visible until it's too late. What mattered to him wasn't the meaning of life, but the courage to live without one. That's the real test. To act while things are still uncertain. To show up even when the ground beneath you doesn't promise anything back. The absurd isn't a theory. It's the silence you feel when you're finally honest with yourself. What you do after that silence, that's your life. If this made you pause, sit with that. And if you want more of these quiet confrontations, subscribe. Shadow Loom doesn't give you answers, just better questions and space to face them.